Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Hyacine guide. Here we'll take a look at her builds, her playstyles, her teams, and her premium options, so that you can leave this video as a more informed player and puller than when you got here. Timestamps, as always, are here, and with that, let's get into things. Hyacine is a 5-star wind remembrance unit who acts as an abundance unit in all but name. On top of the usual hallmarks of a sustain, Hyacine distinguishes herself with workable personal damage and large HP buffs. Here is an overview of her kit. Her basic is nothing special, although it's worth noting that it scales off of HP. Hyacine's skill is a team-wide heal that also summons her Memo Sprite, Little Ika, or if Little Ika is already on the field, then it gets separately healed as well for a slightly larger amount. Also going out of order a bit, but it's worth mentioning here that her skill and ultimate also act as a team-wide cleanse thanks to her second trace, so we can check that box off for her many duties as a sustain. Anyways, let's diverge a little bit and talk about Little Ika. This Memo Sprite is unique in that it does not appear on the action bar in any capacity. Instead, Little Ika passively heals any ally when they lose HP for any reason, while then also draining some of its own HP. Both this heal and the self HP drain aren't really that large, so while this is one form of consistent SP-free sustain, Hyacine's heals from her skill and ultimate are still somewhat relevant in keeping the team alive depending on the fight. I'll also note here that Little Ika is immune to CC, which is one of the, 2 changes made to Hyacine during her entire pre-release cycle. Hyacine's ultimate, firstly, does everything her skill does. It's an AoE heal that cleanses, it summons Ika, or heals Ika if it's already on the field. Its heals are slightly stronger here, but otherwise, yeah, it's the same ability as her skill. But built on top of this, her ultimate also gives her a 3-turn buff that gives the entire team a buff so long as she herself has this buff. If that's confusing, just think Ron May skill or Tribi skill, as it works the same way. This buff does 2 things. For one, the entire team gets a flat amount of extra HP, 30% plus 600. And also, Little Ika gets an upgrade. With this upgrade, Ika's responsive healing now heals the entire team instead of just the ally that needs healing. On top of this, Ika now launches an AoE attack after each of Hyacine's actions. This means that Ika gets 4 attacks per full ult duration, as the buff lasts for 3 turns, and Ika also attacks after Hyacine casts the ult itself. This AoE attack from Ika does not scale with HP, but rather, the damage is based on a portion of the total amount of healing done by Hyacine and Ika, before then clearing half of that tally. So then, this means that her damage can actually slowly scale up to a point if you consistently heal. Say you heal an arbitrary 10,000 HP a turn through Ika and Hyacine, looking at a graph, you'll eventually cap out at a rate where you're gaining as much tally as you are losing. But it takes a few turns to get there, and this is assuming there's no variance per turn from the enemies proccing Ika's healing at different amounts, or whether or not you skill with Hyacine. This is to say, consistent healing per turn is rewarded, while having infrequent healing won't build up this stockpile of tally over time. I also want to mention here that Ika gets a large amount of damage percent whenever it or Hyacine heals, which follows this trend set by Castris and Tribi of having very large amounts of stacking damage percent that will literally always have 100% uptime past the first few turns of the fight. To get through the other passives that Memo Sprites usually have, Hyacine gets action advanced when Ika gets defeated, and also Hyacine gets extra energy when summoning Ika, and extra energy if it's the first time. This also doesn't have to be from her skill, so if you, say, resummon Ika with her ultimate, then the ultimate gives you a total of 20 energy. This extra energy also gives her enough energy to turn 1 ult. As she has an ult cost of 140, she starts with 70 energy, and her first skill gives her a whopping 75 energy. Finally, to go through her traces, starting with her minor ones, we have a large amount of speed, which her base speed is 110 by the way, some effect res, and some HP. All standard stuff. For her first trace, Hyacine and Ika both have 100% crit rate. Yep, just like Bronya. So since Ika's AoE attacks are quite potent, depending on how much the 2 of them heal, it's smart to put some crit damage on her whenever you can, to try and balance out this very lopsided crit ratio that she has at base. On top of this, they also provide extra healing to units below 50% HP. This is relevant for keeping their sustaining up, but it also synergizes well with Castris or Maide due to how easily they bring either themselves or the team to below that threshold. Her next trace is the cleanse stuff that we talked about before, alongside a free 50% effect res for herself. So combining with her minor traces, she has 68% at base. Having the cleanser not be in need of cleansing makes her a lot less of a headache to use. Even if this still isn't a guarantee CC resist, I'm looking at you 50% effect res from Aventurine's shields. Anyways, her last trace is a pretty important one. When Hyacine reaches 200 speed, she gets an extra 20% max HP, and for every 1 speed over 200, she gets an extra 1% healing bonus. This has a cap of 400 speed, but don't worry about actually hitting that outside of something like Divergent Universe. At At base, assuming that you have all of the gear that's made for her, Hyacine will have a base speed of 182, or 188 with her signature. So getting to 200 is pretty easy, and since there isn't a hard cap to what you should be aiming for, it's more so a substat sync to endlessly optimize her with, on top of already also aiming for crit damage and HP percent. Also, just to note, 200 speed is what's needed in order to go 3 times in one cycle. So without any help from DDD or action advances, Hyacine will be able to provide more SP or in-turn healing than any other sustain, other than Gallagher in the SP department. Her technique is a team-wide heal that also increases allies' max HP for 2 turns, which is a nice way to tide them over until she can properly get her ult buff up. Besides giving some initial oomph to her healing tally, the heal isn't really that important, other than also, I guess, giving the dragon some extra health at the start of the fight for Castris. For leveling priority, Ika's Memespite skills and her ultimate are the most important here for getting her buffs and damage to their proper potential. Her skill is important since the amount she heals is tied to her damage, and I mean, you will be using her basic, it does scale off of HP, and she does have 100% crit, so I'm not saying you need to max it, but it will do more than a normal basic attack from a support would. So let's now move on to how you actually play Hyacine. As a sustain, she of course does a lot of the normal things that you would expect. She heals, she cleanses, she generates SP, and she has her own form of specialized utility, with hers being AoE damage and HP buffing. Even for teams that don't care about the HP buffing, this damage can still be a useful piece of utility on its own, such as its ability to whittle down HP bars to below certain thresholds, like making Seelay's resurgences easier to proc, or procking Mini Herder's follow-ups. In practice, she contributes a similar type of sustain to Tribi in her frequent AoE hits, just without the universal buffing or DDD. Oftentimes, for pure fiction fights, the linchpin for fast Wave 1 and Wave 2 clears isn't the strength of your team's attacks necessarily, but also their frequency. Hyacine shines in fulfilling that niche as a frequently attacking sustain, only really behind Linkshaw in break teams. Hyacine's damage is, of course, heavily dependent on the team's ability to support it, as if your team is full of single target supports onto a single carry, Hyacine will be a bit left in the dust. It should also go without saying that, like Tribi, her damage falls off a cliff in single target, as it's literally a fifth of what it otherwise would be in AoE. You also need to keep in mind the cost that it takes to get Hyacine online in a given team. As a sustain with passive healing through Ika, she will be the first one on the team to sacrifice her own game plan for SP generation when the team calls for it. You won't be skilling for energy on her over Tribi or Jade if push comes to shove. So how much you get out of Hyacine highly depends on how tightly you are able to play with the SP of the team to let her do her own thing. Hyacine's biggest caveat is her strength being, at least partly, tied to her skill, which you kinda don't want from your sustain. Not only does the AoE heal contribute to Ika's damage through its healing, but it also helps keep her ult uptime up. Even if you skill every turn, you will still be short of 140 energy. And while this assumes that her or Ika never get hit by a single enemy for the entire 3-turn rotation, it also still assumes that she's, like, skilling every turn. And since she is the sustain, a lot of the normal energy bandage solutions, like Huohuo, Quid Pro Quo, or Shared Feelings, are out of the question. Without her ult buff, she loses her important utility that lets her stand her own somewhat against units like Huohuo or Aventurine. This is to say that if you can't find solutions to her energy problems, she might be difficult to slot in the first place. That solution, as with many things, can be entirely solved depending on the fight. Since Ika, as a Memespite, gives energy to Hyacine whenever it gets attacked, this means that Hyacine gets double energy from AoE hits, and it also means that both of their combined taunt value leads to her getting energy. So, on average, more attacks from the enemy means more energy, even more so than for a standard non-remembrance unit. More attacks from the enemy also means more Ika healing, which can patch up Ika's damage to be at a workable level if the goal is to not skill with Hyacine as much as possible. I do also want to note, with all of this talk about buff uptime and SP generation, that she will be a good deal faster than the average sustain. So unlike slow units like Tribi or Jade, where if their skills have a turn of downtime it can be devastating for the run overall, downtime on Hyacine is not nearly as bad. I mean, yeah, she's literally more than twice as fast as a standard poet set user. So if she has a turn or two of downtime, yeah, this will eat away at her strengths, but it's not as game ending as it otherwise would be for other units. But okay, how does she perform in HP teams specifically? Well, here, her SP issues are a lot more minor, since every HP carry has a tiny bit or zero SP usage, so in the same way that you can spam RMC skill or Gallagher skill on your caster's team, you can, and really should, also do the same with Hyacine. Speaking of RMC, it's also worth noting that her skill, ultimate, and enhanced Ika heals are team-wide. That means that more teammates, so more Memesprites, equals a sizable amount of extra healing. That brings further synergy to the caster's Tribi RMC Hyacine core that this game is is pushing so heavily. She really seems to thrive in these teams with overlapping buffs on units with good personal damage, as she buffs Tribby and Castris so well, while Tribby and Castris give her a good bit back as well. It's been a while since a unit's strength has been so it depends, as in her optimal team she is so incredibly comfy while having no real pressing issues holding her back, but as a generalist sustain she can do well, but her performance is so support buff dependent, enemy dependent, and SP dependent. Really, while there is a lot to consider with how to slot Hyacine into a team, actually playing her is rather simple. Use skill when you can, if at all, and ult either to refresh the buff timer or to launch an Ika attack at the right time. It's worth noting that since Ika's damage is based on healing, it might be optimal to wait for the enemy's attacks before popping Hyacine's ult, so that Ika can get off as much healing as possible before launching its attack. This would only really be needed if it's like the last Ika attack of the cycle, wave, or fight, but it is important to generally keep in mind that Hyacine is unique and her damage being so variable. You can also just extend this to mean that if you're not wasting action value by letting the enemies attack, that letting them do the damage for Ika's healing might be optimal. Besides all that, though, it's standard procedure to ult when it's her turn or shortly after it, so that the buff timer counting down when her turn starts doesn't happen right after the buff is applied. Like again what you would do for Sunday ult, Ranmei ult, and so on. So in all, try to have her team support her damage somewhat, particularly with Tribby or Cypher or something like that, and try to slot in skill usage whenever possible. Although if your team is low on SP, she should be the first one to cut down on her SP usage. A plug here to subscribe. I am very excited to get started with the 3.4 content cycle starting next Monday-ish. Finon, the Fake collab, and the buffed units are going to be huge to cover, so if you want to see any of that in this format, then stick around. Alright, back to the vid. In terms of her gearing, thankfully she is pretty straightforward. For her main set, you want the brand new Warrior Goddess set. This gives a vital 12% speed on top of a 15% crit damage boost for the entire team, including herself. This is a no-brainer to go for. Maybe Passerby is justifiable if you're in crucial need of that starting SP, but speed is pretty important to stack on her, so I'd say meh. For planers, it's a similar story. The obvious piece is Giant Tree for the speed and extra healing bonus, but if you want to run an ER rope depending on what the team needs, you can, if the energy is that dire for the team or fight. For stats, easy peasy here, healing bonus body, speed boots, HP orb, and ER rope. You don't want wind damage orb, as not only does Ika get a crap ton of damage percent, but Hyacine's healing itself just scales off of HP. If you are in an incredibly damage heavy fight with a lot of AoE hits from the enemy, then an HP rope might be worth it for the extra healing. But again, large fringe case that usually won't be that applicable. As I previously mentioned, the main stats to look for are speed, HP percent, and crit damage. Speed being the most important, while the other two are kind of even. The absolute minimum speed is 200, of course, but try to go as high as possible with whatever subsets you have. Since there really isn't an upper limit to the importance of these stats, I would just try to have relics with 3 to 4 good rolls in a mixture of these 3 subs, with speed again as a priority in being on a given piece in the first place. Going into her Lycones, there are only really 2 options to consider. You either have her signature or the Hertasaur Remembrance Lycone. Both give speed, but while the Hertasaur option gives 12% on top of a team-wide 16% damage bonus buff, her signature gives a few things. First, it gives 18% speed, which ends up being an extra 6 to her baseline compared to her free-to-play option. Then, it consumes 1% of the team's HP every time she basic attack, skills, or ults, which she will be able to do very quickly with her high base speed. This consumption is then added as additional damage to the Memosprite attack, based on the amount of HP consumed. Finally, the Memosprite, or in this case Ika, attacking, gives an 18% vulnerability debuff onto the enemy. So there's a lot to say here. Firstly, this HP drain also procs Ika's healing, so this is another add to its damage, its cast charging, and its sustaining prowess. The vulnerability debuff makes her genuinely good with Acheron when using this Lycone, as well as it just being a very strong debuff by itself. 18% is on the high end of what a sustained Lycone usually gives. And, most glaringly, this HP drain also gives Blade a talent stack, meaning that per cycle she gives about an extra 4 stacks. On paper, that doesn't sound like too much, but combine that with everything else that she gives him in the sustaining role, and it becomes quite the package to boost his performance. As I said in my teammate tier list video, speculation on how important this buff is to him right now is not too important in the long run, as literally the day before Hyacine's banner drops, we'll have the first round of preliminary information on Blade's buffs. Generally though, if you want to support Blade, then this Lycone is a cut above what a signature usually gives to a team. Outside of Blade or Acheron, this Lycone is in that really good but workable without tier, like with Robin's or Tribby's. It's nice that she has a genuine option to use outside of it, as while its bonuses are very tangible, her baseline performance with the Herta Lycone Lycone is not half bad, as opposed to what we've grown accustomed to with new Remembrance units. If you want my take, sustained vertical investment options are usually smart to go for, due to how much use sustains generally get on your account. So if she is one of the few limited sustains that you have, then her signature is a lot more valuable. But if she's confined to just HP buffing on your account and not much else, then it's more of a favoritism angle for a specific team getting better than anything else. For teams, I'm assuming most of my audience has already seen the teammate tier list I always release as a pair with these guides, but if not, there's that deeper dive for her individual teammates if you want that deeper dive. For more broad strokes, she has a couple of defined roles outside of her general use cases. For HP scalers besides Castris, she is best in slot, but not that impactful of an upgrade compared to some other strong vertical investment options. Like, I would say Maide's Lycone is more important than an E0 S0 Hyacine if you're currently stuck with his free-to-play Lycone option. For Castris, she's a larger upgrade due to the fact that she actually scales off of better healing directly through being able to explode more dragons. While Gallagher can have higher bursts of charging if you line up your team's abilities correctly against 5 consistently besotted enemies, Hyacine, on top of having genuine HP buffs and actual personal damage, is much more consistent in her healing and allows Hyacine to be used in more general scenarios, in a similar vein to what Anaxa does for the Herda. Blade and especially Acheron are, again, nothing special unless if you have her signature alongside her, in which case she is a genuine upgrade on Castris' level for Blade, and a nice upgrade over an E0 S1 Aventurine, specifically when against enemies who don't proc Aventurine's follow-ups too often. Maide specifically is someone I was a bit off on for the teammate tier list, in that while I was correct in the general placement, where she is marginally his best in slot sustain, her single target healing is actually a bit worse in this case than Luocha's. This is just because her healing is more focused on small AoE charging through enemy attacks, while Luocha's is large single target-ish heals that proc when an ally attacks. She still pulls ahead through her personal damage and HP buffing, but yeah, it's clear that she was more so made for just Castris and Blade with a Lycone compared to being made for Maide. Her HP buff also makes him generate charge a bit more slowly, as his charge is percent HP based, so if he has more HP, it takes more HP being lost for him to get charge. This doesn't matter for his skill, besides the fact that it takes a bit more healing to get him closer to max HP, but it does mean that enemies hitting him gives him slightly, and I do mean slightly, less charge. So yeah, mini addendum to my 5-day-old video, but the sentiment from the video is still the same. She is the best for him, but not nearly as much of an upgrade as other vertical investment options, especially if you don't have Tribi on the team buffing Hyacine's damage. Finally, depending on the team, she can be a good side grade or a small upgrade for Fei Xiao or the Herda teams, where compared to Lingsha, she provides less stacks but overall more damage, depending on how much the enemy charges her, and with the Herda, your mileage also really depends on how much the team buffs her, rather than only buffing the Herda. For everyone else, she is a usable side grade to other premium sustains, but if there are units who genuinely rely on certain sustained utility, such as Break Sustain's fire toughness damage or Ho-Ho's mega impactful energy, then she will be a bit lacking in comparison. Other than that, she's a sustain. Use her anywhere. She's mildly comfy with her high speed, she'll do something in every team, and there's nowhere where she's actively bad, besides with Yanqing, I guess. Finally, let's go over her Eidolons. Breaking the trend of me saying, they're not that great, Hyacine's Eidolons are actually pretty dang good overall. Her E1 gives an extra 50% scaling to her ult buff, which means that the 30% plus 600 goes to 80% plus 600. And on top of this, everyone gets healed by a small amount after using an attack. This lets Hyacine get back that whole charging by having allies attack niche from Gallagher and Luocha, while still keeping it at a flat amount of HP, rather than scaling it based on the amount of enemies hit, which lets her keep her full healing strength in low target scenarios. I would generally say that for Castris specifically, Hyacine's E1 is better than her S1, especially if you also have Tribi to both buff the HP for and benefit from this extra charging with. Obviously, S1 is cheaper, and you can give it to RMC when Hyacine isn't applicable to a team, so it's not a clear-cut, this is stronger, so get it situation. If you are wondering, by the way, this heal does not give the dragon an extra breath attack, even though, in my opinion, the wording kind of makes it look like it should. Her E2 gives her 30% speed, basically always. I should note that without Castris' technique that drains the team's HP at the start of battle, you at the very least won't have this up for the initial action value of the fight, so reason 5000 as to why she was made for Castris, I guess. This is an increase to her base speed, by the way, so it totals to an extra 33 speed-ish, which then means an extra 33% healing bonus, assuming you're already above 200 speed to start. More healing, hooray! This obviously furthers every part of her game plan. More healing, more Castris charging, more damage, the whole shebang. For an E2, it's not an insane increase, but for what it is in a vacuum, it's pretty good. For reference, by the way, you need 266.7 speed to get 4 turns in one cycle. This This Eidolon starts you at 215 speed at S0 or 221 at S1. So for every relic besides your speed boots, you'd need about 9.5 speed per relic to reach this. Not impossible, but not really recommendable either. It does let you get closer to it with DDD though. Her E4 enhances her 200 speed trace, giving her and Ika an extra 2% crit damage for every 1 speed over 200 as well. So with the E2, say you're at about 240 speed, that's an extra 80% crit damage. A pretty decent increase, and for the subpar standards that E4s usually have, then I'd say it's pretty great. Although we're entering that territory where other premium investment options would make a lot more sense than getting 5 entire versions of Hyacine, unless if you just really like her, I guess, which I mean I can't really fault you there. Her E6 changes the tally being cleared from her AoE attack from 50% to 12%, as well as creating a constant 20% alt-type respen field while Ika is alive. So there it is, 20% respen, the most standard support Eidolon anyone could ever think of. This new tally lets her damage scale incredibly hard, as now it takes a lot longer to put as much into the tally as you're taking out of it. So it's a large increase to her personal damage that you would expect from an E6 like this, on the same level as E6 Chibi or E6 Robin. Very good in isolation, not worth 7 copies of a unit, but I think you knew that. And with that, that's Hyacine. The next video, after some miscellaneous shorts, will be the start of the 3.4 pre-release cycle. And as I said before, I am very excited for this one. So I hope you stick around to see my coverage of it. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!